Alright, so the poem I'm analyzing is Ancestral Photograph, and it is basically about him going through the legacy of his father, and mostly his father's uncle, and how it's time for them to move on, and that the times have changed at this point. And Heaney does this through description and specific diction, as if Heaney himself is talking to his father through this poem. So it starts off in the first stanza by talking about his father's uncle, even though he's not specifically mentioned. He just describes the photograph itself by describing the man as having a puff round jaw as solid as a turnip, which is basically a connection to Heaney's work in Nature as It Is for the Irish. The next lines for dead eyes are statued. So dead eyes has a double meaning. It connects to the very classic image that he goes on to talk about, where the men were meant to be like very serious, very poised, not show much emotion like that. And it also has the double meaning of that he's actually passed away at this point. It gives that hint that this isn't just a photo of him. It has a more deeper meaning. And it kind of goes on to talk about the stage Irishman by pointing out how the upper lip bullies the heavy mouth down to a droop, showing that he isn't a very positive face in this picture. And it kind of personifies the lip for bullying the mouth down, showing that it's forcing itself to go down into a droop to match what usually an Irishman would look like. And then it goes on to directly say the deadpan, that's the expression he was giving, very serious. In the next stanza, he finally introduces his father's uncle and brings up the fact that the connection between his father's uncle and his father himself by saying that his father learned the trade from him. And after it mentions the long fixed and sepia tints, that's a way to show that he has passed away a long time ago, that this photo has been up for a very long time, and probably does mean a lot to his father. And by saying it begins to fade, he's saying that the memories of this uncle and his importance is slowly disappearing as time goes on, and time is against him at this point. And by saying the very direct must come down, it is very clear that Heaney believes that it has to be taken down, and that he's almost trying to convince his father of this fact by giving him the idea that it's beginning to fade anyways. So when they take it down, there's the faded patch, and the description and metaphor of like a bandage, as if a bandage had been ripped from the skin, kind of shows that painful experience to it, but it needs to happen. But it feels painful, clearly, like a bandage being ripped very clearly is a negative connotation. So the next stanza, it skips to now a past, and so immediately goes 20 years ago, which is a time jump. And it begins to describe Heaney's experience of herding the cattle, and eventually moves on to the father moving on from that point to becoming more of an arguing dealer. And so, crowd of cattlemen, and the description of the cattlemen of the handled rumps, groped teats, and stood and paused, and then bought a round of drinks to clinch the bargain. These are very manly diction words to choose, because it's very manly to handle rumps, groped teats. It's very invasive, very strong, and so it's kind of showing how crazy it was at the cattlemen, which eventually contrasts the description he uses in the last stanza. The next stanza with uncle and nephew 50 years ago, it now kind of connects to the stanza before with the 20 years ago, but doubles. And by connecting the uncle and nephew together, it shows that they're almost like a duo at this point. And the hackled and herded is an alliteration, which is used to show just how often they would do it. And now Heaney describes this barrel of a man as his uncle, as his great uncle, showing how sturdy, large, manly, and tough this man was to him, and with this hat, and then goes on to describe him more like the first stanza by saying his jaunty hat pushed back, draw thumbs out of his waistcoat, curtly smack, showing how just natural this was to look for him to look like this, and how comfortable and right this looked. And by saying that, Father, I've watched you do the same, it's now more directly pointing out that he's talking to his father about this, and connecting his father to this past and legacy, and acknowledging this legacy itself. And the last stanza is really focusing on him talking to his father and watching the father sadden as the fair stopped, and so it describes the way that time has gone on for them and is continuing. And so he ends up talking about the reasons that it stopped with the farming and the fairs themselves ending. And he ends up contrasting the very barrel-like men and intense, manly people and comparing them to nowadays housewives in an auction ring, which is very offensive to men, and it's very negative and shows just how weak these people have gotten nowadays in his time. And so by saying that the stick was parked behind the door, he's telling his father clearly, it's been long enough, and you haven't gone back to that in a long time, and people are weak, so there's no real reason for you to be doing anything like that anymore. And so it's very interesting that he says it's time to close our chronicle, because he connects himself to that legacy with the R. Instead of just saying your chronicle or his chronicle, they're kind of closing their whole past and connection to this. And it ends very abruptly with the I will take your uncle's portrait to the attic, by saying specifically to his father that your uncle, not like he's saying I am taking my great uncle's portrait down. He's saying it to his father directly, and it also has some connection that he is taking that legacy down and removing his great uncle from their home and family. And so the poem is all about him acknowledging and convincing his father that the legacy was clearly great, but now the times have changed completely and it's time to just move on and continue on with their lives. Some of the more literary aspects of this is that there's a rhyme scheme that shows up in almost every stanza, and it connects descriptions together. And so in the first stanza, turnip and lip are both describing the face. Droop and hoop and Irishman and Pan connect the Irishman and Pan connect the aspects of the Irishman, and Droop and Hoop kind of connects his overall look. Trade and fade in the next stanza kind of connects his life and his fading, what he used to do. Wall and fall both describes the house, because it was first the bedroom and now it's describing the house itself, rising and falling. Back and smack is another way of describing his overall look. Stopped and shopped at the very last stanza shows us this is what people are doing nowadays. Showing that it is now stopped. So it connects the ideas together. The diction throughout the piece goes from being very descriptive and active. There are many active words in the first section, like bullies, and then eventually moves to more of a manly and eventually almost feminine insults, and the sentence structure is very short, almost like he's telling this is exactly what needs to happen. And by keeping the sentences short, he's convincing his father of this way. And it's at the last part of the second stanza, he connects his father to, oh wait, we're over 8, okay.
All right.
Take questions.
When you said that as the time is going, there's less importance of the past.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think? And you said they're closing the chapter of the chronicle. Do you think they would start a new one? And if somebody else might die, do you think they would honor another family member, or do you think that ending was just for the uncle?
I think throughout all of Heaney's poetry, he looks up to his father and his expertise and stuff like that, but he's watching this man lose his legacy, the people he looked up to, and I feel eventually it's going to be his father's portrait that's up, but that now Heaney is taking that and going to more of a writing family and breaking away from that, and just knowing that they can't look up to this man much anymore because he's not relevant in a way like that. But yeah, I think his father would be the next one. But yeah, they are moving on.
Okay, are there any poems that have the same overall meaning or message from Seamus Heaney?
I can see the poem Digging to actually have a kind of connection to this, because he talks about legacy, and so in the poem Digging he talks about his father and his old man and his grandfather and how it just keeps going back in time, but and so kind of like how it ends with him now. Like in digging, he ended with just saying like I'm using my pen now to dig, but in Ancestral Photograph, it's talking about how he's taking the portrait down and moving on that way.
All right.